There's a question mark there. So I'm posing a question as opposed to giving you the solution. I thought I needed a cartoon character in my presentation, so I thought I'd chuck one in.
Was that last second edition?
Everyone seems to be having one.
I feel like it might have been.
By the way, I'm not going full screen because that's where the flickers happen, so you might see a few squigglies. So I just ignore those. About 14 years ago, I bought this book. I like a big show of hands. Who else bought this book? Come on, don't be shy. Sure. Has anyone read this book? Hey, got one. It's actually quite a good book. Back in the day. But there was a chapter in this book, chapter 14, adding behaviors and HTML components. And this is what MSDN today has to say about it. So element behaviors are one of the most significant new capabilities in Microsoft Internet Explorer 5.5. They provide the capability to define custom elements which can be used in the same way as normal HTML elements in a web page. And the way you'd go about doing this is you would create your component, give it a tag name. You would declare your properties, your methods, and your events, and then create your logic in JavaScript. And the reason why this was invented is creating HTML components, widgets, is quite difficult. For example, if you was to have IDs and those widgets are on multiple, on a page multiple times, you would have issues. CSS bleeding into the widget and into the page, you would have issues with JavaScript, whether the JavaScript's overwritten or conflicting. So, for example, jQuery. You might have a jQuery in your widget, and you also might have jQuery in your page. And all these can be solved, but in essence, it takes a lot of thought. And that's why something like this was invented. Unfortunately, this is IE compatible only, so it never really got very far. Some people use these things today to target older browsers using .htc files. So there's an IE PNG fix that a lot of people use for many years using this technology. And there's been a few technologies over the years that have tried to combat this and to provide solutions. One is ASP.NET Web Forms. As you can see, we have a button that generates HTML, and ASCX controls will have prefixed IDs and things like that. And there's some client-side libraries too. So this is Angular, and as you can see here, we're creating an Angular directive called the Hello World, and we're restricting it to elements. We're creating our template here, and this is how we would use it within the page, and this is the output that we would get. Ember also has a technology very similar called Ember Components. The issue with all of these is that they're all their own implementation. They're all doing it their own way until now. So Web Components is a W3C standard. It's still in draft spec, as you can probably imagine, being W3C. But it's heavily supported and pushed by the likes of Google and Mozilla. Web Components comprises of a set of emerging standards which are aimed at making encapsulated and reusable HTML widgets or components. So in a nutshell, you can create your own elements. Something like a nonsense button. So if you must use carousels or slideshows or spotlights, whatever you want to call them, this is a typical implementation using Bootstrap. As you can see, there's a lot of divs, a lot of list items, very messy, a lot of code, just to achieve a simple thing. But imagine if we could do something like this. It's a lot more readable, a lot more clean, a lot more semantic, very much more maintainable. So web components consist of 4 major elements. We have the custom elements, which you've just seen, and then some smaller sort of supporting technologies, sort of HTML templates, which create a set of inert HTML that can be activated later. A shadow DOM, which encapsulates everything within that component, so it doesn't bleed into the page, and the page doesn't get into the widget. And then HTML imports, which allows us to package those up and distribute them. So going through each one of these, we have custom elements. And today, this is how you would register a custom element within JavaScript. So here we have the register element, and then just the name of the tag. And this essentially creates a HTML element as opposed to an unknown element. So if you was just to create an element like foo today, that's an element that you can style and you can use, but it's classed as an unknown element, and it has limited capabilities. With this, you've got a lot more functionality, which we'll go into in a second. This is how you would do it decoratively, and this is how you would use it. You can also extend existing elements. So as you can see here, we're registering the awesome button element and passing in the HTML button element prototype into this prototype, which inherits all of the standard buttons functionality. Again, you can do that decoratively using the extends attribute, and this is how we would implement it in the page itself. So each element has a set of events. We have a created callback event, which gets called when the element is created. We have an attached callback, which is when it gets added to the DOM. A detached callback when it's taken off the DOM or out of the DOM. And then when some attribute is changed, then we get a callback there too, with the attribute name, the old value and the new value. And that allows you to hook in and manage your component and do things that you want to do. HTML templates. So here we can see it's a template tag. This is well supported today in most of the browsers. And then we can put in some HTML, some JavaScript, and some CSS within this template. The best thing about it is that it's parsed but not rendered. The scripts aren't executed. The media is not loaded or played and hidden from the main document. So one of the issues we have with client-side technologies today, like Angular and things like that, if you was to use a scripting template for your client-side data binding, and you was to put an image in there, by default that image would be downloaded even if it never gets rendered. So, one of the issues with responsive images is just that case. So with this new template tag, if your image isn't rendered, then it doesn't get downloaded. If your video's in there, that doesn't get played and doesn't get downloaded. How you use that template is you just embed that within your element tag, and that then becomes a piece of content that you can reuse. You'd normally use that content with a shadow DOM. So a shadow DOM is essentially a separate DOM to the main page DOM, and it's totally encapsulated within your component. So here we are selecting the awesome button component, and then we're creating a shadow route, which is the method that you need to call to create your shadow DOM, and then passing it in some HTML, which is hidden from the main browser. And this is how it would look if you was to view it. Shadow DOM is all around us. So this is an example of a HTML5 video player. And what we can do is, so this is the HTML5 video player here. And if we were just to inspect this element, we can see that we have our video tag and a couple of sources here. And you can see that the video is playing. Now, if we was in Chrome, what you can do is click on the settings and enable this little setting here, which is show user agent shadow DOM. And once you've selected that, you can then delve into what the little bits of components are that make this control up. So we can see we have a div, and another div, and yet another div. And then we have a button, which you can see is the play button. A range, which is the progress slider. And then within the range also has its own shadow DOM, which contains a few divs to make up the thumb and the progress. So this technology is being used today natively in all the browsers. When you've enabled that function, you can actually see it and see how these controls are actually made up. So using the Shadow DOM with templates, all we do is query the template here and just append it to the shadow root. What you'll also notice is that we have this special CSS selector here, which allows us to, within our component, style our component on the outside, and the component itself, main element, not the stuff that's in the template. You can carry on doing that, but the host is purely the containing element. HTML imports. So this is how we get to use our custom elements. So what we do is we import it using the link tag, and we give it a rel of import, and then the URL where the HTML is located. And then we can then use our element within our page. It's as simple as that. Just like any old include, like CSS or JavaScript, but we're including HTML as opposed to script and styles. And we can also use these HTML imports within our components. So we can leverage other components, as we've seen with the video control. So here we've got this awesome tooltip control that we want to leverage. And we then put the element within our template, and we can see here then we can target the My button and link those two controls up to create one master control, a more awesomer button. Today's support for this type of technology, you can see that Chrome, Opera and Firefox are leading the way. Safari and IE, not so quite, which is unfortunate. It's only a matter of time because it is a W3C spec. But there is this polyfill here, which allows us to use this technology in all of the latest evergreen browsers, so the ones that automatically update, so IE 10 plus. And that polyfill comes in the form of a library called Polymer. So this is a Google library. There is a Mozilla one as well called Xtags, I believe. But this is the one I'm going to be talking about today. So Polymer has a number of layers. So we can start off, this is the native implementation in the browser. So this is what Chrome and Opera and some Firefox browsers have, and if it's there, then it would utilize the native implementation. So part of Polymer, we have a polyfill, and that's called platform.js. And this is totally optional. You put it in your page if you want to support those browsers, and over time, this is seen that it will go away as more and more browsers adopt the technology. We then have Polymer itself, which adds a few more functionality to web components, but makes it also a lot more easier to work with web components, a lot easier, a lot faster, a lot more productive, a lot of syntactic sugar. And then we have a library of elements. So these are elements that the Polymer team have built and the community have built that you can leverage straight away in your projects. And the elements come in a few flavors. We have UI elements and non-UI elements, so things that are rendered on the screen, things that just do stuff, which I can give you a demo on in a second. So why use Polymer? So Polymer promotes less boilerplate code. So with the web components example, you were constantly creating shadow roots in script and so forth. Polymer gets away with all of that. Simple element registration, decorative data binding, which is really, really powerful. That is similar to mustache style syntax with double curly braces. Decorative event mapping, published attributes, which are great for giving your component an API. Some change watchers, so when those attributes change, you get callbacks, and automatic node finding, which is just nice to do like a selector, which I'll show you in a second. So an example of Polymer, we would include the Polymer library through its own sort of HTML import. So it's essentially dog food in its own technology. Polymer is exposed as an element. And then we would create a Polymer element and give it a name. So this would be our custom element's name, our tag. And then we would declare our template, and automatically that becomes the shadow DOM. So we don't have to create any shadow roots or anything like that. And then on the page, we optionally include the platform polyfill here, include the button, and then use it as so. Time for a demo. Oh. So this is a standard install of Orchard, and there is a module that I've created that exposes the platform JS, and essentially what that does is sticks that JS file in the head if this is enabled. And there is also some widgets that I've created, and you can see those. So there's just standard content parts with a stereotype of widget, and we can see that we have a YouTube list, a YouTube player, and a YouTube video. So what I'm going to do is go through and create a list of videos from YouTube and bring them into our page. So straight away I've got a video list widget here, and at the moment that video list is just a standard element that we've created called YT-list, and this is the implementation here. One thing you'll notice is that I'm using a style require here to bring in the HTML, which is this one here, into the page. And the reason I do that, obviously, Orchard hasn't got first-class support for HTML imports, but the style require actually can do the same thing. So in our manifest file, we just define the style, we give it the URL. So here we've got the list, and we just set in the import, the rel attribute to import, and just giving it a base path. And we're also taking the type away as well. Alternatively, you can do a register link. The downside to that is that if you're utilizing more than one component on the page, you're going to be including multiple HTML imports because the register link doesn't do any deduping. That won't hurt anything because Polymer is intelligent enough to understand that if you've included it once, that's fine, it's not going to load it again. It's just a little bit cleaner. So our element at the moment is empty. We have Polymer being, oh God, should I make that a bit bigger? That better? So we bring in the Polymer library, and what we need to do is give our element a name. So we'll give that YT list, and we'll also put it in the constructor as well. Now this isn't required if your component doesn't utilize any script, but ours will, so I'm just going to leave that in for now. So first of all, we need to contact the Google API. So to do that, we can use a module called the core Ajax module. This is a Polymer element, so we include it here, and then we can use it within our template here. So what you can see is that we've got this custom element called core Ajax. We're giving it a URL, which is pointing to the YouTube API. We're passing in some parameters to say, look, Google, we want some JSON back. And we're telling this component that the response will be JSON. And then we're doing some data binding, and the response is going to be data bound to that response variable. And then we have this auto attribute that just basically tells this component to go and fetch it as it's loaded. So we're not actually firing any events, it just, as it's loaded, it'll go automatically to YouTube and pull that response down. What we need to do now is add some HTML that allows to bind that data to. So here we've just got a simple list, and as you can see here, we're using an ID. It's safe to use IDs because this is a shadow DOM, so if we have multiple lists on our page, it's totally hidden from the main page, so it won't break the page at all, which is good. And likewise with classes and so forth. What you'll notice here as well, we have an inner template, and we're repeating over that template for every entry in the response. And then all we're doing is binding different attributes from that JSON feed into multiple HTML elements. And then what we can do is we can save that and refresh. Orchard's really fast. There we go. Come on. Module tolerance, make sure that exists. Polymer. Not sure why that's not working. To the output cache. So as you can see, without any script at all, we're able to bring back a list of YouTube videos. And if we were to inspect this, you can see that this is our element here, and our shadow root. You can see the core Ajax, and then our templates, our list items, each one bound to the data. But what we can do is reutilize another component that we've built, which is the video element. And if we quickly look at the video widget, which you probably got a glimpse of on the home page here. This one here, YouTube video. So this is a custom element that also uses the Ajax. But this time we have two different templates. We have one if a video is passed in, and it renders this view. But if a video ID is passed in, then it will go and have its own autonomy, use the Ajax control, and bring that back. And that's what we're using here on the home page. We're passing video IDs into these. But really, for this list, we want to pass in the video itself. So we want to render this. So what we can do is utilize that here. So we are embedding that video and having composition within our components. What we do need to do is import that element into our control. And if we was just to then refresh, we'd get the same result as before. This is an issue with my machine, I think, rather than Orchard. So, there you go. So what you notice now is that because we're using the control, that control has its own CSS, and it's obviously knocked the list out because that set of styles within that video control is totally encapsulated. So what we can do now is allow to make that list selectable. So to do that, we can bring in a core selector element, and we can bring that in here. And this is another element from the Polymer team, which allows us to add selecting functionality to a list. So we have a number of attributes. We have a selected attribute, so this is basically saying select the first item in the list. Target, so in this instance we're targeting the list here. This is the automatic node finder, which I talked about earlier, which is very jQuery-like syntax. It's just using the $ and then .id. So in this instance, we are targeting this ID here for this list. And then another feature of Polymer, which is the decorative event handling. We have on-call select, which gets fired every time something is selected or deselected, and we want to then bind that to a select action. So in here, we can create our, let's also include that element, that core select element in the page. And then run a function when something is selected and detect that it's selected first, because if it's deselected, we don't want to output anything, and let's just output that to the console. And what we can also do is just add some styles for it to look a little bit prettier. You can see here the standard styles that are styling the elements within the shadow DOM itself. So when something's selected, it will go a nice pink. Let's just hide all our styles. So if we was to refresh this page, this was the issue said that I posted on the forums about SSD. It's intermittent at best. I don't know if it's my ISA or whatever, but what that's doing, what I'm going to do next is add a way of being able to search those videos. So what we want to be able to do is create a text box. So in here, I'm just going to create some more HTML, and this is just a label and a text box. But what's interesting is that we're binding the value of that text box to a query variable that we can reuse. So what we need to be able to do is expose that query to the outside world. So we can do that using attributes on our element. So this is a way of essentially creating an API. So we can create a attribute, which is quite nicely named, and expose the query and let's say max results at the same time. So people can then attach those attributes to the custom element and change the way the component works. What we can also do is give these attributes some default values. So we can say orchard harvest, for instance. Max results, say 5. Let's see if that's loaded. And what we also need to do is then allow us, when that query changes, to refetch the results based on that query. So what we can do is create a fetch function, which creates a variable called params and then passes in these values to the YouTube API. So we're using the JSON as we did up here. We then also pass in the query that's coming from the query attribute variable, which is bound to the text box, and we're also passing the max results through as well. So what we can now do is change this to be data bound to the params that we're creating down here. So when that query is changed, we also want to fire this event. So to do that, we need a change watcher. That one. Oh, sorry, I need to. So here we would have query changed. So any attribute, so in this instance query, we just put the word change after it, and Polymer automatically picks that up. So every time the query is changed, then this function will be ran. And in here, we just want to call the fetch. What we can also do is, when the component is ready, so when the page is first loaded, we would also call that fetch. Like so. Wait 10 minutes. Oh. While that's happening, actually, what I'm going to attempt to do is add one of the other widgets to the page. So I'm going to go into the layer videos, and I'm going to add in a player widget. So you can see here we have a YouTube player widget, and we can give it a default video ID and a width and a height. Just call that player. Getting there. Let's just check the styles. Let's just check something. Work. I'm not sure if it's the
Does your YouTube video element have the list item inside it? Because you've got that sitting just inside your UL without an LI around it.
yeah, I think so. Let's double check. I think you might be right. Well spotted. There you go. Here for the man at the back. So what we can see now is that if we look at the console, every time we select, we get the object outputting. So what we want to do now is just test this. So you can see that we also now have Orchard Harvest coming through, and these videos are Orchard Harvest. We can see that we have a limit of 5 videos coming through. So if we was to put cats, then cats will come back, boats, dogs. Very, very quick, hardly any script at all. So what we want to be able to do now is link that video player up here, so when we select something here, then it fires an event and this then gets selected. So to do that, we need to abstract the video ID, because here we're just getting the bit of string manipulation to get the video ID off the end of the URL. And instead of doing a console.write, we want to do an event, fire an event off. So with Polymer we have fire, we also have an async fire. We're prefixing it with Polymer signal because we're using that element on the other component, which I'll show you in a second. But essentially what this is doing is firing a video selected event, passing in the element and also the video ID, which is getting it from that function here. If we was to quickly look at the video player component, you can see that we have this Polymer signals element, which is a decorative way of handling events that fire. It's like a pub sub, but there's nothing you're stopping you just taking this out and using a standard event listener. This is just a decorative way I wanted to show you how to do that without using script. So if we just save and refresh, I hope that doesn't take too long. So all the things I've shown you so far is obviously all client side. With Orchard, obviously it's CMS, and you can expose these attributes through the CMS, so it can be content managed. And to do that, if you look at the video element, we just pass in the model, video ID of the model, and in here we can do exactly the same. So we have our query attribute for our element, and we could just go model.query, and then if that is passed in from the back end, it would pre-populate and essentially bind to our text box here. So as you can see, this is not working. Close the main change. must be a YouTube thing. So within our video list, we can pass in that query. You see there with cats. If we change that to dogs, then dogs appears. You can see it's changing, but for some reason Microsoft has blocked YouTube videos. Maybe, I'm not sure. But I think you get the idea. So, just finishing off, that was obviously a very simple example. But there's a lot of other people out there that are making some more interesting things. So this is a cards element, and if we was just to inspect this element, you can see that we have just a set of these custom elements called Polymer UI card with a set of attributes that give them their own different functionality. So we have this one here that is swipeable. This one isn't swipeable. That one is. And these things you can reuse in your own apps. We have this one, which is a little bit more fun. Which is a Gangnam style. There is some sound to that, but charts. So this is just using chart control, and if you inspect some of these elements, you'll see each one. You have chart donut, chart pie, chart radar, and you just plot them on the page. The Win.js team are experimenting with web components. This is a Win.js pivot control, and again, a set of functionality that just works, and it's just using one element for that. The To Do MVC app, the Polymer team have had a crack at this as well. So this is not just a component, but a set of components that actually build up an app. So if we was to, again, inspect this element, you can see we have essentially a local storage element that allows us to store these tasks into local storage, a model, and a TD to-dos. Something I haven't mentioned is all the custom elements need to have a hyphen in there for it to be distinguished as a custom element. That's why you see that it's TD hyphen something. So this is a fully blown app, so I can go test, I can go done, and I can tick these off, and I can clear completed. All the standard stuff, but it's all decorative, it's all just components that someone's plonked in on the page. You can also build full websites. So here we can see this is the Polymer website, which is polymerproject.org. And things like these toolbars, these menus. This whole site is actually a set of components. So we have a scroll area, we have drawers that pop down, we have a flex layout control, we have a drop-down panel. Feel free to have a look into there and see how all that's built. But all this website is actually built off these types of controls. So we have an accordion, breadcrumbs, clocks, weather widgets, and each one is, it's there to click on and have a little play with. So we have that there. There's also a big community that's growing. So we have customelements.io, which is a place where people can upload their custom elements for people to use. And there's also component.kitchen. So yes, there is a top-level domain called kitchen. And there's, again, lots of different things in here. One thing I just want to finish off with is the Polymer team has created this element builder, I call it, interface builder, maybe. They call it a designer. And this is accessible at the end of polymerproject.org/tools/designer. Just make sure you put the final slash in at the end. This is essentially a GUI to help you create your elements. So if we just click on the source, you can see that we're importing the polymer element like we did before. We have our polymer element there, and it's creating a my element for us. There's a set of default styles that we can overwrite, and then we have our boilerplate code there. But what's interesting is that we can actually build things with this, and it will generate this markup for us. So, for example, we can bring in a scaffold. Let's just give this a refresh. So we can drag in a scaffold. Change the title of our app. This in here some components, so we can maybe bring in a Google map. And let's running a little bit slow. So we can set the properties of this map. So you can see we have the longitude and latitude. We have some styles. Let's set that to 100%. 100%. And what we can do is add in a core field into our area here, and maybe set the background color to white. Location, placeholder, and we can save this into GitHub if we wish. So we can generate a token. So in here we have copy that. And this allows us to preview our app. This Google Maps taking a while to load. You can see also the tree. That Google Map is there. So let's delete that Google Map. I think they're actually updating this. This is a different UI to what was there before. You know, we've got this redo thing. So this is something that's updated sort of in the last few hours. Which is great for demos. So there used to be a deleting there. Let's delete that Google Map and drop it back on. We're getting something. And what we can do now is hook up that search with the Google Map by using another component called the Google Map Search. And this exposes a query and a map property, so we will bind that to the map itself. So this is the Google Map here, that's the ID for that, and we'll bind that to the map property of that component. And with query, we want to bind to the input, so that would be core input and the value of that core input. Next, if we click on the map, we want to bind the longitude and latitude on the results of that map search. So result dot latitude and result dot lungi. And we can maybe change that to 18, change that to satellite, the idea, and then we can save and also preview that. So now we should be able to do a search. Space Needle looks pretty impressive. Statue of Liberty, also impressive. Or even more impressive, Blackpool Tower. So you can imagine that's quite powerful. There's also support in this to create a gist in GitHub. So this is what we've just created. This bringing all of the different components in using the HTML imports we talked about, some styles, and the different controls that we've used. And as you can see here, we've used no script at all. It's literally just data binding these controls together. And then we can take that, drop it into our own component, and expose that into our app. Any questions? Probably.
Steve, what was the support, the browser support for Polymer?
Yeah.
Does it say anything on the side?
It's all of the modern evergreen browsers, so it's essentially IE 10 plus. The reason for that is the shadow DOM is very difficult to polyfill, and that's the biggest issue, and that's why it can't go any lower than IE 10. But all the other things work a little bit lower down. So, I should also say, thanks to these guys here, there's a lot of videos that I've watched and a lot of articles that I've read from these guys, which are the core of the Polymer team. But thanks to those guys, and some details if you need to get in touch.
Will it play nice with Bootstrap, or is it one or the other?
There's no reason why it wouldn't. You've seen there's a flex layout control, that it could be a Bootstrap control. Those controls could be anything that you want, those widgets. And a lot of the examples out there are taking an existing functionality, like a carousel, like a tab control, like an accordion, and essentially exposing that into one element as opposed to div soup, which I call it. Any more questions?
Well, I have one more.
Yeah.
I did a little WordPress development in the past, and one of the things I was impressed with. One of the things I was impressed with was the ability to use shortcodes, because they were so easy to use for the end users.
Yeah.
Has there been any thought with Archer to do that, or it seems like this would be a nice match for it, actually?
Yeah, I think the shortcode stuff is.
It's tokens.
Yeah, I think it's an old technology that was there to bypass some of the inefficiencies of WYSIWYGs and things like that. So, yeah, I think this would be a great replacement for that. The big strength of this is obviously the encapsulation, but the nesting of the components, the reuse of the components is also quite key. How that is exposed within Orchard, if it is difficult, I guess, because it's not, I've done a couple of widgets there using content part. It needs to go lower down, maybe at shape level for that. But yeah, I think replacing those shortcodes is a good thing.
So the module that you referenced and the widgets, are they in the gallery or?
The things that I wrote aren't in the gallery, no. I can put the Polymer one, it's quite a simple one. All of the other components are just components, the generic, that can be used with any CMS, with any, but yeah, if you wish, I can put that onto GitHub or stick it in the gallery if you wish.
Now, can you answer your own question? What is the future of widgets?
Get out. No, is the short answer. I think this has a part to play. I think it would be ignorant if we ignored this type of technology. I think it's definitely something we should discuss. Whether it is the future of widgets, in terms of orchard widgets, I'm not sure. I think in terms of widgets in general, I think so. I think that's what the technology was designed to do. Obviously Microsoft, back in the day, 14 years ago, was innovators in this space. They saw a need for it. They actually had a technological view link, which created the encapsulation as well, which was like, if you was to create your HTML component and you opted into view link, you would get a very similar experience to the Shadow DOM that we've discussed. So these guys seen this coming. So there's also some of the libraries, I think, like Ember, for instance, the founder of Ember, Tom Dale, I think, he has publicly spoken that he would support web components. Wow. And so as soon as these web components become mainstream, he'll change Ember and have web components as opposed to Ember components. There's also a talk, because it's being pushed heavily in Google, and the Polymer team is Google, that Angular version 2, there's rumour that the guys are talking in that space as well. So directives could change to accommodate web components.
Thank you very much, Steve.